If we survey Latin America as a region, we see extraordinary natural beauty, abundant natural resources, abundant and potential human capital, deep and rich cultural traditions, and yet, through much of the last century, a good many sadnesses.
We're truly excited to have you here today and hope you enjoy the day's events. The organization committee would like to take this opportunity to thank all of our speakers for taking time out of their busy schedules in order to be here today. We'd also like to thank President Randell and Professors Becker and Singales for agreeing to take part in this groundbreaking conference. Similarly, we would like to express our profound appreciation to all of our sponsors who were instrumental in putting this conference together. Finally, we would like to thank everyone who worked really hard during the last 6 months in order to make this event a reality. Over the next couple of hours, you will be able to gain first-hand knowledge regarding current business and economic trends in Latin America from some of the most prominent figures in the region today. We hope that this forum will add to your understanding of Latin America's ever-increasing role in today's global economy. Additionally, we hope that you propose challenging questions for all of our day's speakers in line with the GSB's long-standing tradition of critical debate. It is now my honor to introduce to you the President of the University of Chicago, who will provide us with the day's opening remarks. Don Michael Randell attended Princeton University, where he received a bachelor's, MFA, and PhD's degrees in music. He joined the Cornell University faculty in the Department of Music in 1968. Thereafter, he served as department chair, vice provost, associate dean, and dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. In 1995, he was named provost of Cornell University. He later became president-elect of the University of Chicago on December 13, 1999. He began his term of office in July 1st, 2000. His scholarly specialty is in the music of the Middle Ages and Renaissance in Spain and France, but his interests incorporate music as diverse as Latin pop and jazz. Under his editorship, the new Harvard Dictionary of Music was published in 1968, and he completed the companion Harvard Biographical Dictionary of Music in 1996. President Randell also edited the Harvard Concise Dictionary of Music and Musicians, which was published in 1999. Please give a warm welcome to President Randell.
Muy buenos días a todos. Me es un gran placer darles la bienvenida a la Universidad de Chicago. Welcome all. You will wonder what a professor of music is doing talking about any such thing. You know, it's un disparate total. The fact is, my family lived in Latin America for 30 years. It's the only home I know, really. And for that reason, it's a particular pleasure for me personally to welcome you all here and to say how important I think this session is going to be and how important such sessions will need to be if we're to confront the kinds of issues, opportunities, and problems that face Latin America. If we survey Latin America as a region, we see extraordinary natural beauty, abundant natural resources, abundant and potential human capital, deep and rich cultural traditions, and yet, through much of the last century, a good many sadnesses. Unfortunately, it has to be said that Latin America has not benefited from its neighbor, the United States, in the ways that it ought to. The United States' policy with respect to Latin America has seemed at moments to swerve between misguided interventions and equally misguided inattention. Of course, the solution to Latin American problems must be Latin American solutions. But we must all work together for the benefit of the whole region. And the University of Chicago is an institution committed to the notion that ideas have the power to change reality. And ideas are fashioned by bringing together the best minds that can be assembled to think in a disciplined way about problems as well as opportunities. It's for that reason that we like to celebrate our deep intellectual ties to Latin America as a region, but then also to renew our commitment to the study of Latin America, to bringing together the best minds that can be assembled to think deeply about the opportunities of Latin America as a region and of the Western Hemisphere in general. Surely the world requires the best efforts that we can provide in order to address everything that faces us in Latin America and in the Western Hemisphere generally. I look forward to being a small part of today's activities. I hope that your discussions will be especially fruitful and productive, that they will lead to even more productive discussions about matters that matter to us all very deeply. Thank you very much for being here.
It is now with great pride that I present to you our morning keynote speaker. Dr. Pedro Aspe has been since April 2001 Chairman of the Board and Chief Executive Officer of Protego Asesores Financieros, a leading investment bankery advisory firm in Mexico. From 1996 to March 2001, Dr. Aspe was Chairman of the Board of Vector Casa de Bolsa, an investment banking firm in Mexico City. Dr. Aspe has also been since 1995 a professor at the Instituto Tecnológico Autónomo de México, located in Mexico City. Dr. Aspe has held a number of positions with the Mexican government and was most recently the Secretary of Finance and Public Credit of Mexico from 1988 through 1994. Dr. Aspe is a member of the Advisory Board of Stanford University's Institute of International Studies, of the Visiting Committee of the Department of Economics of MIT, and of the Center of Politics and Economics at Claremont University. Dr. Aspe also sits on the advisory board of Marvin and Palmer in Wilmington, Delaware, an American international group where he has served as the director of the corporation since 1996 and is chairman of the audit committee and member of the executive and financial policy committees. Dr. Aspe holds a PhD in economics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Pedro Aspe.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be back in the University of Chicago. I have been here 3 times. Even though I did not study here, I have the benefit of having had at MIT 3 Chicago professors and at the right time, and I must say that I learned a lot from them. When I was invited to talk about the lessons in Latin America, we were a little bit worried. I was a little bit, see? They asked me to talk about what lessons, what we have learned in Latin America from some of the good policies in the region in the last 20 years. And I was, you can always take any country and say, well, during this time or in that time frame or in that policy, they were doing the right things. But I thought it was not clear, a clear way to present, especially to you, which bulk of you are the students from Latin America, and you are going to go back to Latin America. And I thought it was lots more interesting and hopefully more useful to pick up one country who has done the bulk of the reforms, and okay, good, and has delivered the best growth in the region. And this is Chile. And we have to ask ourselves, why is Chile the only country in Latin America that has been growing for the last 20 years without inflation? I think it's It's worth it. No other country has done it. Why only Chile? For 20 years, high copper prices, low copper prices, high interest rates in the world, recession in the U.S., recovery in the U.S., boom in the U.S., bust in the U.S., everything, and Chile keeps on growing, growing, growing. And I prepared this presentation trying, as a foreigner, I'm a Mexican, trying to look what can we learn in a humble way from Chile. The Chileans are usually very humble, so they are not going to teach us, they know how to do things, but they are not going to start teaching us. But I think we should learn from the Chileans. Okay, so I'm going to present three things. First, Chile and Latin America over the last 30 years, the economic performance. So we tried with Fernando Delgado, who just graduated from here. We tried to put together this economic data for 30-year period so that we can compare. Then we will go into some detail on the reforms of Chile, and then hopefully we'll get some conclusions. Okay. It's possible to distinguish 4 periods in Latin America in this time frame. The import substitution period of the 60s and the 70s, the debt crisis of the 80s, adjustment and structural change from the 80s to the mid-90s, and then the emerging market crisis to current periods, okay? We know about the import substitution period, and basically they were heavily dependent on imported inputs and monopolistic control over the domestic markets because the economy were obviously closed. And very interesting that in that period of no competition, no open borders, the countries that performed the best were Brazil and Mexico, and Chile clearly underperformed relative to Brazil and Mexico. In fact, if we look at that period, external debt, Chile not only had the worst performance during that period, but they had the worst performance also on the dependency on debt and on inflation. Look the inflation rates of Chile. Okay. Okay. During the 80s, we go to the second period. Chile started doing some of the reforms, as we will see later on. And it was the only country that during that period had no fiscal deficit. Very interesting. From having been the basket case of the 60s and 70s, suddenly they start equilibrating their public finances, and they have basically a zero, a perfectly balanced budget, which compares with Mexico. Just look at that. That's the early 80s, when we borrowed heavily to expand oil, and the chronic case of Argentina, which we know, and Brazil. Okay. Then what happened during those years? Well, now Mexico was the one that had the highest inflation rate. No, before was Chile in the import substitution, then Brazil and Argentina. Now it's here Mexico, and we have a very I mean, relative to Chile, a very unstable inflation index. Of course, I have to do a second graph because look at the scale. If I can turn on this, let me see. How do I turn it on? No. Okay. Well. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Look the scale. This is 140%. No, that's Switzerland. No, as compared to the Southern Cone with 3,500. Okay. Which was the inflation rates of Argentina, Brazil, and the rest. Okay. Then, this is the most important graph and which is complicated to gather because there are so many sources, etc. So we spent a lot of time trying to do this. And this is the first lesson, and I really would want to focus on this. If out of this talk we can remember three things, this will be the first one. I really think it's important. Look, basically the Chileans on the fiscal, this is measuring the fiscal deficit relative to GDP. So here is -5%, -10%, etc. And you see that Chile, over all this period, basically have equilibrium, and in fact, in 15 years have been having a surplus. That is, what it means is really is retiring debt, because with the surplus you pay back debt. The only country that has done it. Let us look at Brazil. If you look at Brazil, they have good years, and whoop, they slip. Crisis, of course. Whoop, they come back. They got the equilibrium again. You look at Argentina with fiscal deficits. Finally, it seems that they were having equilibrium again, fiscal deficits. And if you look at Mexico, we have these huge deficits, and finally we were able to correct it for a while, for some 5 years or so, and then again we have a slip back into a fiscal deficit of around 3% at the present moment. So really the only country that has had perfect equilibrium in the last 10, 15, 20 years is Chile. Very important to remember. Okay, now let us look at, in this phase 3, the adjustment and structural change, what has happened to growth? Well, we're saying that Chile was underperforming if you look at the 60s and 70s, even to the 80s, and suddenly, because of putting their house in order on the fiscal side, Chile is, during the period 80 to 90, is the country that grows the most, followed by, this is the world rate of growth, and this is the other countries, Mexico and Brazil and Argentina. Look in inflation rates. In inflation rates in that period, the only one that have extremely stable and converging inflation rates, Chile. Look Mexico, no? Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, okay? Again, changing the index, no? The level. Okay. Let's go to some of the key reforms of Chile. Well, the first one was the tax reform that was done very early on by some of the graduates from this university, by the way. They really wanted to have, well, they substituted the sales tax for the value added, and they have the value added at one single rate across the board. And they reduce heavily the marginal income tax rates. This is now studied only in economic history, no? It's 30 years ago. But then a second phase was the reduction in public subsidies. And then they start returning enterprises which were illegally seized. Then they started the privatization, but not everything was privatized. And this is a second very important lesson from Chile. It is not true that everything has been privatized. And Codelco is a very good example of this, the main copper producing company of the country and one of the best in the world, which remain in state control. However, this has been a very efficient firm. And this is very important to remember. They have managed it with tremendous efficiency, and in fact, it's a source of revenue. Okay, and you can see the productivity growth of the company. Then the second reform, so the first one was on the public sector. The second reform had to do on trade, and on trade, they basically went to, they dismantled all controls to unification of the multiple exchange rates, and they replaced all the non-tariff barriers to tariffs, and then finally they have a uniform tariff rate of 10%. What they have done on the value added, one rate across the board. Now they have one rate, uniform tariff rate. They have one period of fixed exchange rates, then they went to flexible exchange rates, and then they start doing the trade accords. In fact, the first one with Mexico was signed in 92, but the second one was in 99, but the first one they did was with Mexico in 92. And these are all the ones that they have done, and of course now the U.S. trade accord, which is very important as we will see. The third reform had to do with the Social Security reform. As you know, the old system was based in a pay-as-you-go, which is very standard across the developing world, and that was changed to a full capitalized system, and they aim to simplify, unify the system. They have a minimum pension guarantee, but the individual capitalization benefits and the private and competitive administration of the pension funds is a reform not only which has been extremely successful in Chile, but they have exported it as technology to industrialize, well, first to the rest of Latin America. We copied it when I was in office in 91. We copied it with the Sistema Para el Retiro in 92 reform, and many of the countries in Latin America have followed the Chilean path. Not only those, but also 4 European countries, as you know. Okay, then the big reforms on the financial sector. That was a big change, not only on the privatization, but on the supervision and regulation, where they did a very good job. Then the labor market reforms, a tough period, the first one, but the second was liberalized, and they showed lots more flexibility. And as you know, this flexibility has meant a lot for the growth of the country. Privately, on privatization, the second stage, they did, finally, they privatized another 200, in fact 207 enterprises. So they finished up the job there, and decided that the other firms were not going to be privatized, but they had to be efficient, productive, and with never in the red. Okay, as part of the social sector reforms, they did an extremely important reform on the education sector, and this is the most interesting of all. Look at the public subsidies to the private sector as percentage of expenditure in education, and this is the OECD average, and this is Chile. By the way, this is Canada, this is the US, okay? This is Paraguay, this is Mexico, okay? And big reforms on education, and they are spending a bulk of as no one else in education. Same thing on the social front is the pensions, then education, and then health and nutrition, and then the housing reforms. These are extremely important reforms that were coming along in parallel with economic reforms. Extremely important reforms, especially the one in health, has been very successful. Okay, third big lesson. They change the judiciary system in a way that no one else has done it in Latin America. They have training, they have reforms where they separate all the administrative sections to the legal part. They introduce technology. They spend a lot more resources to the judiciary. They improve infrastructure. Basically, they modernize the whole system. And well, when you ask in the service that they do about the rule of law, that's the ranking in Latin America. This is Chile, this is Mexico, Brazil, rest of Latin America, Argentina, Venezuela. Okay, they have on political stability too. The health indicators too. Amazing. By the way, I hope that all of you have it clear that 5 years more of the present growth of Chile, and Chile will become in the year 2008, 2009, an industrialized economy by IMF standards. It's very important to remember that. Okay, this is the productivity growth of Chile, and if you see, they keep on increasing, no? Okay. Finally, what happened in this period? If you take the last 10 years, well, not only Chile outperformed the rest, more than double the rest, their growth, and this is extremely important. They have done it in the first period, 80 to 90 already, but in the second period, 6% versus 2% in the rest. I think this is very important to put it in context, and the Chileans do not like to tell us this. That's why it takes a Mexican or a Brazilian to show it. Okay. Now, it's very important that structural and current reforms get translated into tangible results, and the credibility of public institutions and macroeconomic stability is an example. These are indexes done, well, I have here the sources, and Chile is at the forefront in macroeconomic environment, in public institutions, by far, at the front. Okay, so let us sum up with some of the results. Since 80 and up to 2003, Chile is by far the economy that has grown the most of all Latin American countries, and that has exceeded the lowest inflation rate among the group. Why? Well, first, it's the only country with in the last 12 years without a fiscal deficit, and in the last 24, except for 1 year of 1%, basically, they have had no fiscal deficit. Second, is the country with the most open economy and the lowest tariff levels. Third, is the one of the most solid and enforced the judicial and the rule of law regimes. Fourth, the only one with highly productive, world-class state-owned companies. Fifth, country with a profound social reform in place. Sixth, the economy with efficient pension system reforms, growing capital markets. So, as it happens with most successful stabilization and adjustment programs, there is not a single reason for the ultimate success. However, some positive and negative lessons can be derived. First, lack of privatization is not an excuse of improductivity and excessive spending. Codelco is an example of how you can run a public sector company. It will be better if you can privatize it, but if not, at least make it productive. Second, rule of law and the judiciary reform are key framework for sustained economic growth. They are key for economic reforms. Third, this is maybe one of the most important lessons on Chile. Switch of political ideology of ruling party, going from right to center to left, has not changed economic policy. This is the most important thing. They have had surplus on the fiscal side with the right-wing government in place, with the center government, and with the left-wing government. So the socialists have maintained perfectly healthy public finances. And this is one of the lessons, and President Lago is to be commended for this incredible management that he has done on the macroeconomic front. Fourth, structural reforms at restoring the basic balances. need to be put early on. One of the basic internal and external balances have been restored, and it is very important to keep them under control. Chile has shown us how. Fifth, for the efficiency, enhancing structural reforms, one needs to move in many fronts at the same time. Otherwise, the expected effects of specific reforms is substantially reduced. And this is particularly important for the social reforms. The social reforms have to come alongside with the main economic reforms. The private investment response to these reforms take a long, long time. Why? Because the private sector needs to be able to predict where incentives are going to be in the medium term before undertaking irreversible investment decisions. Here, predictability of policies can do much to accelerate the investment response. So you shift, you change policy, but you have to persevere. Why? Because the private sector has to be seen this policy as a permanent policy. And until it is seen as a permanent policy, then investment will flow in. And another big lesson from Chile is that all the regulation of the financial system has to come also with appropriate regulation and supervision. So here is the summary of the results. This is Chile. These are the rest. These are the rest of the countries. And Chile with a productivity growth of around 5%, and in our countries, whoop, and then up and down the rest. So I will want to end with a quote. Being here in the University of Chicago, I had to come back to a quote. Let me just put here the macroeconomic index, who is at the top? Rule of law, who is at the top? Corruption index, obviously it's honesty at the top. Technology index, who is at the top? And I end with this quote. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Espen, for such a great presentation. We will now open the floor for questions.
Please.
You said that Chile was able to maintain their economic policies regardless of the change in government parties. Can you talk about or expand on how that was likely executed?
Yeah. I'm a foreigner in terms of Chile, so let me tell you my opinion from the outside. When they started the policies, they start communicating to the population that all these savings from all these things on privatization of the malfunction of public sector companies, etc., they were going to do a social reform exactly at the same time. So people were seeing, well, we are not having these things, but we are having these other things. That's first. Second, they open up the political system. And when they open up the political system, they have laws in place where they have to go to Congress. And they have to explain perfectly well all the policies in Congress. They have a tremendous diffusion of information of the public sector finances. Third, and I think it's one of the most important things, they did some changes that in order to reverse them were practically impossible. Example, the very early on independence of the Central Bank of Chile. The independence of the Central Bank of Chile cannot be reversed. And so what you know perfectly well when you go into a country and you say, well, what's the legal framework for the independence of the central bank? Is this a constitutional reform, or is this a legal reform, or is this a presidential decree? If it is a presidential decree, well, you know perfectly well that it can change like the weather in Chicago, no? If it is with a legal, well, it takes a year. If it is a constitutional mandate, it's very, very complicated. Practically, it's irreversible. And if it is a constitutional arrangement, like in some of our countries, like in Mexico, that you need a 2/3 majority in Congress, then once that you approve the constitutional amendment, it's irreversible. That's some of the lessons, for instance, that I learned personally from Chile. And when we proposed independence of the Central Bank of Mexico, when I went to Congress to defend the constitutional amendment, I remember very well a deputy asked me, Mr. Aspe, are you copying Chile? And you ashamed? I said, no, I'm not ashamed. We are copying Chile, yes, but we are copying also Holland, and we are copying New Zealand, and we are copying Germany. Big, good central banks with constitutional reforms so that these cannot be reversed. And I think that's a very important lesson also. And last but not least, the big challenge, of course, was 3 years ago when the election gave to the socialists the majority. And very interesting enough, look what President Lagos has been saying, amazing. He said, we are going to maintain macroeconomic stability. We are going to maintain fiscal equilibrium. I mean, that was out of the question. That was a state policy, not a governmental policy, because that crosses boundaries from left to right. And then he said, but we have to work lots more with respect to social spending. And for instance, he proposed, he said, in my first year of administration, I'm going to spend a lot on bringing broadband to each of the public primary schools in Chile. And Chile is the only country who has now broadband in all public schools. We cannot have it in the high districts of Mexico City. No? They have it everywhere. But they have done that within the budget, within the recognition that there are scarce resources and that you are not going to have a public deficit, because if you go to public deficits, then et cetera, comes. So I think that's the reason. But the test has been passed in the last 2 years. Yes.
It's clear, first of all, thank you for the insightful comments and detailed presentation. My name is Sean Marshall. I'm not a Chicago grad, I'm a Huntsburg grad. But my question is, not to take you off the hook for Mexico, it's clear with everything going on politically in Mexico now, it probably won't be reformed until the next election. But could you comment a little bit about what needs to happen, whoever becomes the new president, what needs to happen in Mexico in order for the long-term growth outlook to be improved similarly to what's done in Chile?
Yeah, well, basically, we have, in terms of the reforms, we have 3 big reforms pending relative to Chile. On the pension reform, we did it on the private sector. We haven't completed on the public sector. Secretary Gil Diaz, Secretary of Finance of Mexico, and a graduate of Chicago, and a teacher of mine, by the way, is proposing the pension fund, the extension of the pension fund reform to the public sector. That's key, absolutely key. That's one of the big reforms. Second, we have a big requirement on energy. We have, Mexico is an energy abundant country with the highest prices of energy in the world, kind of off. And third, we need to advance lots more on education and health reform, on the social reforms. So it's, we have done some of the reforms, as the Brazilians have done some of the reforms, the Argentinians have done some of the reforms, but we have not done the basic ones. The only country that has done the basic reforms is Chile, and that's why the sustained growth. Yes.
Good morning, Jim Zurich. I'm actually a Chicago boy here myself, but actually lived in Chile from 93 to 2000. In fact, I was very privileged to live there as an expat. In fact, my neighbor was Carlos Massad, the president of the central bank. Very interesting to get a bird's eye perspective now, taking a step back, looking after the economic turmoil. In particular, Latin America and other countries have copied a lot of the models in Chile. In particular, for example, the pension fund, the AFP. In Argentina, that's been the JNT, and in Mexico, the Afores. What has been the experience of
Yeah, well, I can comment only on Mexico. We have the capitalization system only for the private sector pension funds, not for the public employees. Okay, so it's not a complete copy of the Chilean model. We copy the first part, and then in the way the reforms stop. The results have been, I would say, quite astonishing in Mexico. I would say a total success. Let me just give you three or four examples of what has happened with the Afores in Mexico. First, this is the first time in Mexico that we have long-term credit. And we have long-term credit because it's the first time that we have long-term deposits or long-term savings. When I was a kid, I used to go to Houston with my parents, and I remember that I said, what a strange country. Why do they sell cars by the month? And my father would say, what's that? Where did you learn that? I said, well, they say that this car costs $360. Why do they sell it per month? And we didn't understand, well, because you have 5 years credit. And why do they sell these houses for the month? Is a monthly payment, and you have a mortgage of 25 years. 25 years, my God, we cannot get a credit in Mexico in 25 months. And you know, I always had that since I was a kid. So when they did the first, Jose Piñera did the first reform in Chile, I have met him in Cambridge because he was studied at Harvard when I was at MIT. And we got together and then start introducing this reform. And okay, so let me just give you one example of long-term credit. Today, under the Afores, we have rough numbers, $50 billion. And the average tenure is 30 years. How do I get that? Very simple. The average worker in Mexico is a 35-year-old, and the average pension age is 65. So you have 30 years on average these deposits, which are today $50 billion. Second, they are growing at 20% per annum. And they are going to grow at that rate, even though the economy is growing much less. They are growing at that tremendous pace. And third, this is the reason why there is a housing boom in Mexico. Why? Because you can get a mortgage today in Mexico for 20 years. How can you get a 20-year mortgage? Oh, because we have deposits of 30 years. Why can't you get in Mexico a fixed peso rate of 10 years? Oh, because we have deposits on the other side, etc. So I think it's a tremendous reform. It has been managed by the private sector. There are 40 or 50 Afores, I don't know, something like that, and they compete, etc. And of course, there is always room of improvement. There are criticisms that the fees are too high, etc. Yes, and they are improving these things. They are saying that they should be open up to not to have only government paper, but to have foreign equities, as in Chile. We just received the announcement in Mexico last month that Afores will be able to diversify their portfolio, buying up to 10 or 15% on foreign paper, and which is extremely important, as you can imagine, to diversify your risk, because if not, you have only Mexican risk, and you want to diversify worldwide your risk. And the government has been criticized because the deregulation is going too slowly. I think they're going at a fine pace. I really don't criticize them on that. I think they have done a very good job. They are gradually opening up with very good supervision. We're creating the competitive atmosphere for all the pension reform. So this is a Chilean idea that has spread Latin America and the world. Now, what is important is to have a good legal system behind the Afores, because if there is a crisis and then politicians can take over those assets, well, then it's a disaster. Thanks God, in Mexico we have not had a bad experience on that front. Yes.
somewhat against the hot money problem by making a slightly restrictive portfolio investment policy.
I agree with both comments. I think that the first one is particularly important. Well, both of them are, but I will want to expand a little bit on your first comment. Take what trade can do to you in terms of diversification of your exports. And I want to give you 3 examples of this amazing thing. In 1980, Mexican exports was 90% oil. In 1980, yeah. And Venezuela's exports were 80% oil, the same. Mexico opened up, Venezuela didn't. So what happened 25 years later? Venezuela has 85% concentration on oil, and for us, I think it's 5%, 8%, with high prices at this moment. It used to be 5, absolutely, and it's now 8%. So it's a total diversification. And this is extremely key, extremely key. Second comment, you know, in Mexico, we have a free trade agreement with Chile since the early 90s. And one of the amazing things that you see in Mexico is early on, I mean 10 years ago, was that we could afford to buy salmon, no? And said, where is this salmon coming from? From Chile. And Chile in the 80s didn't have salmon in Santiago, forget about exports. And it's amazing what they have done. And the other side is the Chilean wines, no? Which has become a very robust industry with a tremendous quality. These are the changes that trade brings to you, that no central panel could say, oh, I think in Chile we can export salmon. I mean, the market can do it, but you have to provide incentives, and you have to put in place a framework of permanence, of long-term vision, where the private resources could be allocated for the more efficient use. I take 2 more questions. We still have time. Yes, please.
I'd like to know what was the role of external investments in Chile in order for it to grow, and what were there after the fiscal implementation,
Yeah.
policies?
It took a long time. The foreign investment to Chile took a long time because of 3 things. First, it was very far away. Second, it has had a lot of volatility on their macroeconomic policies. And third, they had a big period of nationalization and confiscations, etc. So it took a long time. But they persevered. That's one of the key results. If you want to have short-term results, forget it. I mean, what you have to do is like if you have these oil tankers, you change the direction, and you change the wheel, and you have to wait because it keeps on going like that, and finally it starts turning towards growth in that sense. But you have to persevere. You have to persevere. So it took a long time. So what I really commend the Chileans for, it was that they persevered. A lot of people were criticizing them. Oh, they opened. They are not bringing enough foreign investment. Look, this is a mistaken policy, etc. And they persevered. They persevered. And now they have. And in fact, now with the pension reform, in fact, they don't need it anymore. I mean, they are starting to be a capital exporter country because wages have been going up, and it's like the U.S. in the 19th century versus the U.S. in the 20th century. No, I mean, in the beginning you have a current account deficit, which is perfectly okay because you are a net capital importer. You use these proceeds correctly, and you build up infrastructure, build up all these things, and eventually you start be neutral, and eventually you will be a capital exporter. Chile in the next, in the next decade, 2010, 2020, I bet they will be a net capital exporter. They have done everything well. Yes. Oh my God. I think we need a Chilean to tell you, not a Mexican, not certainly me. The only thing I could tell you is the following. I'm not worried or embarrassed for short-term deficits. You have supply shocks, and where if you have a temporary fiscal deficit, it wouldn't be a disaster for me. What I think is really a disaster is to have increasing deficits without a policy to correct them. And I have always learned the lessons on the fiscal side. I really believe on fiscal prudence. And I think you ought to start discussing that lots more right now. Because if you think that the world is going, when you have a huge fiscal deficit in an open economy, the mirror image is that you have a big current account deficit. And you can have current account deficits for two reasons. One, because you have a perfectly balanced budget and people will want to invest in your country because there are a lot of opportunities, which is the good current account deficit, or the bad current account deficit, which is when you have a huge fiscal deficit. I'm afraid you are having the second one. And the thing is, if people will be willing to keep on financing 500 billion per annum, the U.S., and the answer is no. I think no way. So what we are going to see, I think, is that either you have to increase interest rates fast, or you do not increase it fast enough. While you correct the fiscal deficit, you are going to see a depreciation of the dollar. And that's exactly, I think, what we are going to see. But eventually you will have to face it. But anyhow, this election time, I hope that you Americans discuss it, because the rest of the world will not be able to finance you. You are too big. I take one last question. I'm back. Yes?
You were talking about there's a lot of reforms that are in place at the same time. You were talking about fiscal, judicial reforms, but it seems that it could be argued that something that precedes all those reforms would be sort of an institutional change where people in that country will say, okay, this is where we want to go, and we're going to change within these boundaries instead of going this way, and then next. Do you think that there's something that preceded these changes, and what could it be? Because it seems that if you start putting certain pieces, but you don't put all of them at the same time, then you won't get those results. Do you have any thoughts about those institutional reforms that need to precede such a change?
Well, I think it's impossible to do very early on everything. So what you have to do is, in the beginning, you need leadership. And why leadership? But that's something that we learned, by the way. Excellent papers come out of this school on leadership. You need leaders because it's like when you are in a sailboat. I was last year with my youngest son in sailing in a lake, and I'm not a very good sailor, but we had suddenly a storm came to the lake, and we were very scared, and we were tacking, and I said to my son, put your hand on top of that. We are going to keep the direction. And, the boat was doing this, a small sailboat, and it was just doing like that. And then he said, Daddy, should we turn? I said, no, if we turn, we really will go overboard. We have to, to keep the strong hand there. And I remember my son looking at the front of the boat, and my hand was hurting, because he was holding tight. And finally, we passed the reform. All the things I have done to educate him, I think that was the most important one. Why? Because when you have headwinds and you said, okay, things are rotten and they are criticizing you, this is going too slow, this is not good, this is, how they call it now, neoliberal stuff, no? And this is for the rich, all these things, and say, look, we have to persevere, we have to persevere. That's what leadership is all about. And that's what really can change societies. And as the president of the university said, never underestimate the force of ideas. Ideas can do wonders. Thank you.